Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year's. Hope things are off to a great start for you and your team this year. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We're going to play a brief video clip to get started as we're waiting for a few more people to join today's webinar. Enjoy the video, and we'll talk to you in another minute.
We all share a universal need to progress and realize our potential. And we believe that science is the key to unlocking that potential. Science takes you from the playground to the pros. And in our industry, we call this sales acceleration. Sales acceleration is not just a piece of software, it's a system, it's a platform, so you can reach the right customers in the right way at the right time. We understand your need to progress, and we believe that science is the key to measure, anticipate, and accelerate.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. By way of introduction, my name is Mike Plant. I'm the head of demand generation here at InsideSales.com. And my role here at Inside Sales, I spend every day focused on how our company can drive more sales growth. And today's webinar is a series of recommended New Year's resolutions for sales managers to help unleash sales growth as we head into the new year. Before joining InsideSales.com, I had worked at a variety of technology companies, including Citrix and Symantec, as well as a bunch of small tech startups. Joining us today as our featured speaker on today's webinar is David Kerr. David is the Chief Operating Officer of Tinderbox. David, why don't you spend a few minutes introducing yourself to the team?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today, and Happy New Year. Appreciate being on here with Mike and with the InsideSales.com team. Just real briefly, Tinderbox helps companies sell faster with more effective ways to create and deliver sales proposals, contracts, and presentations. We work with sales teams using information they already have in CRM or CPQ solutions to build personalized sales materials with a single click. And just a little bit about my background. I've spent years running sales teams, both inside small startups that are business-to-business startups, as well as running sales teams at organizations like Angie's List and Groupon. So I've done plenty of this New Year's resolution planning, have had boards and others tell me, hey, here's the number you've got to hit this year, and so it's fun working with the inside sales team and with Mike to work through these New Year's resolutions.
Thanks, David. The reason we played the video at the beginning of the webinar today is because I think there's some parallels in terms of New Year's resolution between folks getting ready to go to the gym, and you see this when you have your gym membership, and you see this tsunami of people that you don't recognize showing up in January, and you can bet that 80 or 90% of them will be gone by March. And we felt that in the sales organization, as we're looking with a new fiscal year, and particularly at new fiscal plans and responsibilities, that this was a great time to step back and take a look at some of the best practices we've seen sales teams around the world implement to unleash growth. A little bit about the logistics of how today's webinar is going to work. It will last approximately an hour, maybe a few minutes less. There is a Q&A box you'll see on the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type in questions as you think about them. We'll work to answer a couple of them in real time and some of them during the Q&A. We also encourage you to join the conversation via Twitter, hashtag ISDC webinar. And also today's webinar is being recorded, and at the end of the broadcast, it is hashtag Inside Sales Webinar. And at the end of today's webinar, we'll also tell you how to get an access to the recording if there's anything you want to play back or share with colleagues and coworkers. So New Year's resolutions, it seems to me that people kind of fall into three camps. There are the people that make new resolutions every year, and like I said, they wash out by February. These are the folks that you see showing up at your gym on January 1st or 2nd, and then a month and a half, 2 months later, they're gone. Then there are people that kind of have given up altogether on refreshing or coming up with New Year's resolutions around the new year. And then I've seen people who effectively take advantage of that psychological milestone to drive change. We thought that, sales might be a function that would or should engage in New Year's resolution planning. And why is that? Well, at the new year, for many of us, particularly if your fiscal year and your calendar year coincide, you're sitting on top of a new plan. And that new plan has new challenges. For a lot of the sales executives that I'm talking to in my day in, day out work, at companies in a variety of different industries around the world, some of those challenges include doing more, i.e. producing more revenue with the same number of headcount they have, or not as much incremental resources as they are expected to grow. And in some cases, even doing more with less resources. And so we think this is an ideal opportunity for the sales community to get together and say, okay, how can we achieve some of those daunting goals? David and I have put together a set of what we believe are best practices that you can adopt as New Year's resolutions. We believe that these practices, when implemented, can help unlock strong revenue growth in your companies, even, or maybe even especially, during tough economic times. What's more, our research indicates that while companies may have implemented one or two of the best practices we're going to talk about today, very few of the organizations seem to have embraced them all. We think that there's, as a result, opportunity for each of your teams to get something out of the New Year's resolutions that we're going to recommend today for sales leaders. Now, what are those New Year's resolutions, those best practices? Here's the list, and we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail as we go throughout today's webinar. But as you can see, they kind of span the funnel. There are things that a sales organization can do at the very top of the funnel as demand works its way through the funnel, all the way right through to close, that can actually improve your sales. And we're talking about sales growth in the 15, 20, 30% range by adopting these best practices. Towards the top of the funnel, looking at how your sales structure is organized to capture and nurture and mature opportunities, and how you manage those opportunities and get those opportunities to into your sales funnel. And then in the middle of the funnel, how you prioritize the activities of your teams using the data that you have available. And then as you work your way through the actual pipeline, how do you standardize your sales processes, build a path to close, collaborate effectively, and manage your pipeline to get 15, 20, 30% sales growth. And then we have a bonus recommended best practice or New Year's resolution around your entire sales technology stack that we'll take you through. So let's jump in so you guys can get an idea of what we're talking about. And the very first New Year's resolution that we're recommending is that you specialize each of your sales processes or each step in your sales process. Serious Decisions, they're a large consulting firm that focuses on the sales and marketing professions, says that about 50% of organizations and sales organizations in North America have not yet specialized. What do we mean by specialized? If you take early in my career as a marketer, my sales counterparts had multiple responsibilities. They were responsible for following up on whatever leads were created by marketing. They were responsible for doing their own prospecting and sourcing. They were responsible for working with channel partners, and they were responsible for closing deals. When we talk about the label generalist, that's what we're talking about, a sales rep that's responsible for many different kinds of activities. In many companies that I worked with early on in my career, the sales team the sales generalist was even responsible for post-sales account management. What Serious Decisions is recommending and what we're recommending with this particular resolution is to break those responsibilities into a series of different specialized sales reps. So as Serious Decisions has assessed the marketplace, a little more than half, about 55% of companies use a generalist model, What we're seeing as a best practice is to break that down into 4 to 5 different kinds of sales reps in your organization. When companies specialize and break those down into different roles and allow sales professionals to become deep experts in each of those different roles and implement optimized processes around those different roles, when we've measured the outcome before specialization and after specialization, we've seen a lift of up to 7 percentage points in revenue. Now, this isn't 7%, this is 7 points. So if you were on a growth rate with a generalist team of, say, 10% revenue growth year on year, just this one best practice could get you up to as high as 17% year-on-year growth rate. I wanted to just share a couple of examples of specialization. So the generalist model I described, the same person is responsible for following up on leads, prospecting, closing sales, and then following up with and managing existing accounts. The first stage that we see companies do, a semi-generalist model, is to actually break out account management. So you have a dedicated customer success or other account manager that takes care of the relationship post-sales. Semi-specialist models kind of work a little bit up the funnel more and break out the appointment setter role to take care of teleprospecting new opportunities or following up on inbound marketing leads. And a more specialist model, and the example down below, is where you actually break up even inbound demand, lead follow-up or lead qualification and appointment setting from closing, from account management. I think it's really important to acknowledge that in sales specialization, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You need to determine which specialist model works best for your business. Here at InsideSales.com, for example, we do have a full specialized model, but we have customers that maybe don't have a lot of inbound marketing leads for their business. And so it wouldn't be necessarily effective or efficient to break out a sales development rep or team just to handle inbound lead qual. Or some of our customers have more transactional business, and as a result, it's not necessarily cost-effective for them to break out account management or customer success or whatever you happen to call that post-sale role. But the key to unlocking those up to 7 percentage points of revenue growth is to leverage this assembly line concept. So that if you're somebody who is teleprospecting or otherwise sales prospecting every single day, and that's your main focus, you develop special skills and effective systems and optimized processes to do that. If you're a closer, if you're in a generalist model, and I've lived this as the person responsible for demand gen through most of my career, you're going to focus just on closing because that's the number one way you get paid, and all of your other responsibilities, whether it's lead qualification or doing your own prospecting or following up with existing accounts in a generalist model, they're going to fall by the wayside and kind of die on the vine. So that's one of the reasons we really advocate this sales specialist model. We wanted to pause for a second and just get your take. Let's see how the audience on today's webinar compares to what SiriusDecisions benchmark data indicates nationwide. If you'd be so kind as to please just check on the screen what your company's sales model is on this continuum between generalist and specialized. Again, just as a recap, a generalist model is where your closer does a bunch of different activities from lead qual and teleprospecting all the way through account management. Semi-generalist is where you've broken out that account management role. Semi-specialized is when you start to break out the appointment setting roles, and a fully specialized model at the bottom is where you have broken out both prospecting and lead qualification from closing and from account management. We'll give it one more second for folks to vote. Interesting. This is the data. Thank you for participating. As per SiriusDecisions market data. Not surprising, this audience is representative. About half of the people on the phone on today's webinar indicated that they're using a generalist model, and 8% have implemented a fully specialized model. So one of the New Year's resolutions we would recommend is considering if you can unlock or how you might unlock more revenue growth through the adoption of this specialized sales model. Now let's take a look at the second New Year's resolution that we're recommending. One of the reasons that this sales specialization model is so impactful from a revenue growth is so you can actually effectively embrace this second New Year's resolution, which is specifically following up on inbound leads from marketing in as little time as possible. Now, as Inside Sales actually measures how well companies across North America and the UK do in this specific area. The last time we did this, we measured a bunch of companies that were headed to Dreamforce 2015 back in September. And we basically secret shopped their websites. And based on this data from this secret shopping, it takes companies that we secret shopped in September about an average of 38 hours to respond to an inbound marketing lead. Now, when we first started secret shopping several years ago, the average was 5 days. So 38 hours, about a day and a half, is much, 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 much better than it was even just a few years ago at 5 days. However, we've done a bunch of statistical analysis on a bunch of data from companies using our platform where we can collect response data, and we've identified that the best practice is following up with qualified inbound demand in 5 minutes or less. Now, what are some of the impacts to your business you can see if you follow up with inbound demand that quickly? You can see as much as a 21x improvement to the qualification rate of inbound demand to qualified opportunities in your pipeline. In other words, if you have 1,000 leads a month and you used to get 2 of them into the pipeline, and you're at that 38-hour average that we see in the industry today, if you can figure out ways to get closer and closer to that 5-minute or better response time, you can start to see qualification rates on that same pool of inbound demand approaching 21x. Now, again, we're not talking about investing a bunch more in marketing to create a bunch more leads. We're just talking about using New Year's resolution number 1, specialization, to create a team that does nothing but follow up on inbound demand. In fact, this is not only something that Inside Sales has identified and done some research on. David over at Tinderbox has some experience about how this can affect business in his universe. David, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, both of these resolutions, so one, the specialization is something that we do here at Tinderbox, where we've got the lead qualifiers, we've got folks that do outbound, and then we hand that off to different size teams that are focused on SMB market, teams that are focused on the enterprise market. And so we've got that specialization, and the teams are also measured in terms of their response times. The other piece that I would add on to this is not only is it responding immediately to those inbounds at the top of the funnel, but as you move into the closers, the response times typically to get some type of a proposal or a response, whether it be email, a proposal, or a contract out, typically takes anywhere from 3 days to 5 days, depending on the size of the organization and what they're doing. And we've found if you can turn that around by leveraging data and other information in your CRM solution, that you can really reduce that down to hours or at least into a day's turnaround time. And typically, if you're the first one out with that information, the close one rates we've seen across our customer base has increased somewhere in the 30% range. So it's response time not only on when those inbound calls or outbound calls are coming, but then also as you're following it through the pipe as well.
Thanks, David. In fact, you bring up a good point. In a sales specialized model, first of all, what we're talking about here in terms of responding immediately is governing the handoff, if you will, between marketing creating leads and the sales organization following up on those leads. When you adopt sales specialization, you increase the number of handoffs. And one of the tips I would propose that you think about as you embrace sales specialization, or you're already on the journey to sales specialization, is monitor those handoffs. So just like David was talking about in the handoff from the appointment setters, the sales development team, to the closers, and how fast do the closers process proposals, get proposals out, and move through the different stages in the sales pipeline to get to close quickly. We also even maniacally monitor the handoff from the appointment setters to the closers. We have found a lift in revenue by driving the appointment setters to do live transfers to sales reps when you have an inside sales team, instead of pushing the appointment out to tomorrow or even next week. So just the general concept of responding immediately as things flow through the pipeline, not just leads into the sales organization, but the entire journey through the pipeline, I think is really the spirit of the best practice. Looking for just a minute at some of the data we see around immediate response, here's what the decay looks like. This is measured in terms of minutes. Now remember, I said that the pool of companies we surveyed back in September had a 35-hour response rate. Here's what the decay looks like, just to show how fast the contact rates plummet in mere minutes after the inbound lead is created. So again, recommended New Year's resolution number 2, respond to the inbound demand that your marketing team is producing immediately. Great. Now that you've resolved to make that first call or that first contact with that inbound lead quick, now for our third New Year's resolution. It's around being persistent. Now, this particular resolution actually applies to both your prospecting motion and your lead qualification motion. The current average that we see in the industry, and again, this is something we measure when we secret shop B2B websites, is that we see businesses attempting to follow up with an inbound lead 1.5 times. Now, teleprospecting, we see it a little better. We see when companies, acquire database records and start their prospecting motions, we'll see them perhaps make 3 to 4 attempts to contact a prospecting record before they retire that record. What we would recommend as a best practice, as a New Year's resolution for you guys to adopt, is to move that contact attempt volume for your inbound leads as well as your prospecting records up to the 6 to 9 attempt rate. What we've seen in the data we've analyzed for companies that where we've been able to measure this and do a before and after is we see a 3x lift in the initial contact rates. Now, if you imagine, again, going back to our prototypical company where they're generating 1,000 inbound leads in a month, let's say that they're able to effectively contact using their current schema and their current response rate, whatever it is, maybe 50 of those leads. This is talking about actually being able to get that contact rate up maybe to 100 or 150 of those 1,000 leads. So there's a real value in being persistent. It's the way to wring more value out of both those marketing leads that the marketing team spent money on and those prospecting records that your prospecting and lead research activities have identified are the ideal contacts to talk to. In fact, David was sharing as we were getting ready for this particular webinar a really interesting case study from his company's business on the value of being persistent. David?
Yeah, this is probably extreme, Mike, but so we fit right into the middle of what your best practices are. We typically, our team is tasked with seven touch points on that, and obviously that's working through the process depending on whether it's the SDR or the closer. But we had a particular SDR that was targeting a large SaaS company that we're all familiar with, Salesforce, and this SDR went to the extreme and had 23 contacts before we ended up. Finally, the person on the other end, said mercy. They finally took the call, took the meeting, and said, I give up. Like, who is this person? It's unbelievable that he was so tenacious and persistent. And long and short of it is we ended up closing that division shortly thereafter. But he was extraordinarily persistent and had 23 touches through that process.
And a successful engagement with a prospect. That's fantastic. Thanks,
Yeah.
David. Here's some of what we're seeing in our system data when we analyze what successful contact rates look like. Now, again, this happens to be for inbound leads. The curves are similar for prospecting records. The x-axis is a little different. But as you can see from this data, for companies that really only do 1 or 2 dial attempts to follow up on inbound leads, they might get 40 to 60% of the total contacts they might otherwise get out of that population. If they just get up to 6 contact attempts, they might get 90% of the total possible contacts that they can achieve out of that pool of inbound leads. It's time for another poll question. I'd like to see how you guys think your company is doing. How many times do you believe that your sales teams, if you're in a generalist or semi-generalist model, or your sales development teams, follow up with either a new prospecting record or a new inbound lead before they abandon it and move on to the next? I'll give everybody just a minute to follow up. By the way, an interesting soundbite going back to the immediate response concept. We found that 78% of the time, the deal that gets sold ends up going to whichever vendor responded the fastest. This was an analysis of trade show data. We found it really fascinating that the immediate response practice not only improves contact rates, but it actually gets you more share of wallet from the customers you're talking to. I'm going to go ahead and click and see how you guys feel your teams are in following up. 70% of you feel that your teams are following up approximately 2 to 4 times. That's fantastic. I think that there is, if you guys want to embrace this particular New Year's resolution, I think if you can get them up to 6 times, there's going to be a little bit more value you can wring out. And with today's telephony technology, you can wring out those extra dials or extra contacts without additional human team members. So it can be done cost effectively. Now, at this point, to simplify our conversation, I've really focused on telephony as the mode of sales communication. But as we all know, the modern sales motion, even at the top of the funnel, leverages different sales communications channels. Telephony is certainly one of them, but so is email. Even social is starting to emerge as a key sales communications channel. This leads to our 4th New Year's resolution that we'd like to recommend to you guys, and that's establishing an optimized and standardized cadence for your different sales motions, whether we're talking about the folks that do prospecting or the motion where you're doing prospecting or you're doing lead qualification or you're doing existing account follow-up. We recommend that you standardize that approach and you measure and optimize your team's performance against that approach. We actually work with customers in developing custom cadences because, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. But in general, we have seen that a best practice is to have a standardized cadence that's somewhere in the 10 to 12 day range that leverages multiple channels and that helps deliver up to a 26% increase in the appointments set by the team that's, like, for example, SDRs. So, for example, I'll verbally walk you through a cadence that we recently developed with one of our customers for their outbound prospecting reps, just to give you an example of what I mean. You get a new prospecting record into your prospecting list, and you unleash your prospecting rep on it. On day 1, we would actually recommend 2 dials separated by 3 to 4 hours. And on the first dial, we'd recommend just a dial. If you get no answer, move on. On the second dial, we recommend leaving voicemail and email. On the third dial, 4th dial, those would be on day 2, a 5th dial on day 4, a 6th dial with voicemail and email on day 6, etc. Now, what we do is we partner, and this goes all the way out to day 10, we actually partner with our customers' sales organizations to design optimized cadences for their businesses. We leverage some of our best practices, but generally speaking, how many days or hours between each contact attempt in your cadence and which sales channels that you use for each attempt, really you should be optimizing and designing that for your specific customer base and industry. The fifth best practice that we're recommending for a New Year's resolution is around figuring out how you prioritize what your sales teams focus on using data. We've got some research that indicates that sales reps, whether they're generalists, closers, prospecting reps, they spend about 68% of their time researching instead of selling. When they spend the majority of their time figuring out which of these inbound leads am I going to call, or which of these prospecting records am I going to call, or which of the opportunities that I currently have in my pipeline am I going to work on today, what am I going to do next, we find that they're making those decisions pretty subjectively and with relatively few data points. It might be as little as 1 or 2 or 3 data points, say time zone or who I subjectively feel is going to be ready to take my call today, or I like this person better so I'm more comfortable calling them. There isn't a lot of science behind how reps prioritize their day. We believe that the best practice is to actually use the data that you're collecting in your CRM and increase that to 5 or 10 or 15 data points, and to implement technology to do that. What we do is we actually aggregate for our customers on our platform not only all of their data, but anonymized data from everybody using our platform, plus literally billions and billions of external data points, macroeconomic and macroenvironmental factors, like what's happening with that company on the stock market today, or what's happening in that specific city where the prospect lives. And we're using predictive analytics to actually help reps prioritize which opportunity am I going to chase today, or which lead am I going to follow up in the next hour, or which prospecting record should I call first. But the idea is, regardless of what data you have available, figuring out a way to use that data to prioritize for each member of each function in your sales team what they're going to do next. We have found that when customers don't let their sales teams subjectively select, they use data and do a little bit of prescription about what their reps should do, that you can unleash up to 24% revenue increase just with this one New Year's resolution. David, I think you also had some interesting insights on how using the data that our new modern sales platforms are collecting to improve prioritization can help unleash revenue growth.
Yeah, sure, Mike. Just touching on it a little bit, and again, this gets a little bit more to the bottom of the funnel. Obviously, what you're talking about here is prioritizing data through that cadence process and through those specialized sales resources. But if you can get more engagement from the prospect through the process, so if you are getting touch points in terms of contracts that have been opened and interacted with, or proposals, or even emails, we find that leveraging and prioritizing that data in terms of who to follow up with, when to follow up with them, also being able to see data in terms of who a contract or who a proposal has been forwarded on to, we see lots of opportunity for leveraging that data further down in the funnel and during that closing process as well.
Right. Thanks, David. Lynn on Q&A asked, she says, look, most of us don't have access to 80 billion data points, and what's a more realistic best practice? I certainly think that trying to figure out a schema where you're leveraging whatever data you're collecting in your CRM, usually you're going to have, where did this person enter our universe? Was it a database that we purchased for a prospecting record? Did they hit our website? Did we meet them at a trade show? How they came into your universe is certainly one set of data you should leverage. You should leverage what your CRM knows inherently about where they're physically located, right? It intuitively doesn't make sense to call somebody in Hawaii at 5 in the morning, but that happens because people don't take a look at where the prospect they're calling is located. Other data that you would have readily available to you, industry verticals. I know lots of folks that use Salesforce as their CRM as an example, and this is not exclusive to Salesforce, have live real-time firmographic and industrial data loaded into their system through a service like data.com that can provide some of those data sets. But even if you can look at, what's the title level, title function, where's this person located, what time of day is it where they're at, what's happening in their industry, even 5 or 6 data points can start to improve how you prioritize what your reps are doing day in, day out. The idea is just to start leveraging the data that you have in your CRM to unlock that growth. The 6th best practice that we wanted to recommend was modernizing how you motivate your sales team. I think, as I talk to sales leaders around the industry, we're still seeing a lot of, manual whiteboards or large pieces of butcher paper with hand-drawn thermometers towards some specific goal, and periodic cash or other prizes or incentives or spiffs. I think those are still useful in many situations, but with the flow of data into your CRM, I think you're able to produce, and we believe that we should be looking at motivations and motivational tools or gamification that provides a little bit more real-time measurement and maybe even more visible leaderboards where people can see, 10 minutes ago, so-and-so just passed me. Because I think that what ends up happening, and particularly in some of the inside sales roles, it can be a pretty tough slog day in, day out on that inside sales role, whether you're a lead qualifier or you're a prospector or you're a closer. So finding ways to provide smaller chunks of motivation throughout the day, throughout the hour even, by leveraging the performance data that you're gathering in your CRM. Again, we believe that we've seen that when teams deploy a more modern gamification strategy to their monetization, something that's providing stimuli throughout the day, that they've seen up to a 38% lift in sales activity throughout the day. The 7th best practice is, as a 30-year marketing pro, I've been really thrilled by the advances that we've seen in the past few years about how at the top of the funnel, inbound demand is getting better converted into the pipeline, leveraging some of the best practices that we've talked about. But I've seen a lot of businesses where opportunities still seem to get bogged down or stuck in the sales pipeline and even stall out. Our friends over at Tinderbox advise companies of all stripes about how to drive productivity through that sales pipeline. David will take us through the next couple of New Year's resolutions that are really focused on, okay, something's in your pipe, now how do you get it to close? David, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and when I think about New Year's resolutions, obviously one of the ones that always comes to mind is, shedding those pounds from the holidays and so forth. And most of the resolutions are typically common sense, but it comes down to discipline, right? It's eat less, exercise more, but it's the common sense fix, but it's the discipline to get it done. And when we think about sales processes and we think about our own in Tinderbox and those that we work with and advise, typically we see between teams there's oftentimes lack of common language between those teams, or the steps in that process that they're working through sometimes may be random across teams. And so we've really focused quite a bit, not only here, but with our customers, on helping them to standardize that process that they're going through and make sure that we spend all this money in marketing, creating all of these assets and marketing materials, and making sure that those are able to be leveraged by the sales team at the right time in the process, so that if you're early on in the discovery and you're going into a specific industry vertical, so let's say it's the healthcare vertical, are you getting the right case studies that you need? Are you getting the right type of essentially marketing materials, whatever it may be that you need for that proposal or those assets that you're engaging with that prospect on? And then also, I was talking earlier when we were talking about using data to prioritize, have that drive the decision making in terms of who your reps are following up with, what kind of sales assets they're using in that follow-up. So, for instance, as a sales leader here, every day I get a series of notifications that shows me where deals are in what stages, and in fact, the previous evening or the previous day, what deals have been opened, have they been passed on to legal or procurement, and essentially what kind of engagement there's been. And so then we use that to prioritize our follow-up to that next stage in the sales process. I also think one of the things that we've discovered is that companies, I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking, that sales reps oftentimes spend days, hours, and in some cases weeks if it's trying to get ROI materials and things such as that, that there are a number of internal blockers to getting the sales reps, to getting account executives what they need right at the right time. And so what we've seen as a best practice there is leveraging what you have in your CRM or in your CPQ and in your content management solutions, and enabling your sales rep with essentially a few clicks to be able to get them the right materials at that right time to work them through those sales stages. As we go into the 8th resolution here, one of the things that we've found as a best practice both here and in the other companies where I've imposed this is we're always looking for the compelling event. We were just talking earlier today that a number of companies have moved their their fiscal calendar off to a month. Salesforce, for instance, has done this, and it allows you to drive a couple of compelling events, an end-of-the-year compelling event, or then turns into a end-of-year fiscal year, which might be the end of January, as a compelling event. But I see lots of times when people start getting things through the funnel, 50 to 75%, that they're not putting together a closing calendar, essentially, that would really get them to the next steps, to really outline, to really forecast and architect what are those next steps on that closing calendar. So we essentially, deals of any size, kind of mid-market or greater, what we require is the team to put together a closing calendar that walks through every step with that particular prospect, whether it be it has to go through a procurement phase, it has to go through a security request phase, has to obviously go through legal, and each date on that, so that I don't just see pipelines that show end of the quarter closes, that everything is going to close on, say, March 31st, but that we begin to see specific dates in that closing calendar, and then we can begin to see how we move those if things slip by a couple of days. So really putting that discipline in place. And what we do it with is any deal that's weighted at 75% or greater, and we've got a 6-step sales process that we then enforce having that closing calendar. And I'm just curious, just again going to another survey here, I'm curious for the folks on the phone, how many of you in your sales process use something like a closing calendar or some version of that with specific dates to each step as you close? So if you can take a few seconds and go ahead and let us know if your sales teams do this. Would be interesting to see. And we've definitely seen an uptick. You know, when we look at our close one ratio to our opportunities, we're in the mid-20s essentially from that close one ratio. But we've seen it increase by implementing this calendar as a best practice. That we've seen that move up a couple of percentage points. So interestingly enough, here this is not something that people are doing that they're requiring. It's 43%, less than half of these deals have some type of closing calendar. And again, I feel like it's a common sense practice, but it takes a certain amount of discipline to get that done. And it's also something that you can build into your CRM if that's necessary as well, along with those sales stages, so that you're able to track that more easily from a sales management perspective. All right, coming to the ninth step here, and this is, again, it's kind of the bottom of the funnel. And most companies that we see right now, whether it's at the end of the quarter, you know, we see so many companies at the end of the quarter, it's, you know, ideally you want to have 20%, 25% closed if you're going by quarterly targets in that first month, and then 50% of your funnel closed by the second month, and then you see that 50% in the third month. But we see a lot of companies that it's 75 to 80% coming in that last week, and it's pretty frenetic. And most companies we see, there's PDFs, there's faxes, there's emails, lots of attachments, and you're just kind of left in the dark in terms of where your prospect is engaging with this closing process. So we see a best practice as choosing the right type of technology to facilitate that type of collaboration. And there's now technologies that are out there that allow you to do the redlining online or commenting online. Obviously, DocuSign is the leader with e-signatures, or EchoSign or Right Signature are out there. But all of these processes begin to really streamline that whole process from that closing funnel. And again, seems like a common sense piece, but so many of the companies that we work with, we see still sending out PDFs, still sending out an Excel spreadsheet with their pricing, and by the end it's, you're printing that out, you're getting legal to sign that, and then you're putting it on the scanner and scanning it and sending it off. Adds just so much time in that entire process that can be streamlined dramatically by picking the right type of tech stack to put these things together.
And let me just echo, as a marketing buyer, I can't tell you how many times I've been sent an Excel document that I have to print out and sign and fax back to buy whatever marketing service I'm trying to procure. Completely agree with everything David just said about our 9th best practice.
Yeah, and I realize there's a whole mix of industries on this call today, but especially those that are in the high-tech space, there's always some irony in it that you've got this wonderful piece of technology that you might be promoting, yet you're still working off of some kind of 1980s, 1990s types of processes. Mike, you were gonna share some thoughts on our 10th resolution here.
You bet. Thanks, David. So look, guys, one thing 2016 is not going to eliminate for any of us is the need to produce a sales forecast. The rest of our companies need that visibility on what we think we're going to actually close. But we do think 2016 is the year to change how we forecast. So you guys know the drill, right? Monday morning, Thursday morning, whatever the cadence is in your particular company, the sales leadership team gets together and we ask our reps, what are you guys going to close this week, this month, this quarter? And that's a pretty common, pretty prevalent practice. We actually think that this is the year where we need to actually start asking our data what's going to close. Particularly with modern CRM systems where we're starting to capture more and more of the interaction between our sales closing reps and our prospects. When was the proposal opened? Email. Did it get opened? How many times have they visited our website since we sent the proposal? What's the number of days between the last telephone call or the last conference call? Have they asked for the security audit yet, depending on whatever your category is? There are so many pieces of data that we can now use that with business intelligence tools, it's relatively straightforward to collect that data out of your CRM and actually start saying, hey, the deals that close, what's the pattern for those deals 30 days before they closed or 60 days before they closed? What were the sales interactions that are captured in our CRM that seem to be predictive that this thing's actually going to close? It's pretty straightforward. We see a 3x lift in forecast accuracy when companies pivot from asking their reps what's going to close to actually asking their data. Now, I'm not suggesting that you're going to stop asking your reps, but you're going to, I think the first step in this particular recommendation or New Year's resolution is to just start querying your data intelligently, not necessarily any new data, but the data that you're already collecting, and just seeing what that data tells you predictively about what's going to close. Now, those were our 10 recommended New Year's resolutions that if you implement some of the ones that you haven't yet implemented, you can unleash a significant revenue growth this year and hit that sales plan that you're probably otherwise thinking, how on earth am I going to do that with the resources we have? We do have a bonus resolution around looking at your overall sales technology stack. David, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just briefly, and I think so many of us now probably are suffering a little bit from app fatigue. There's so many different solutions out there, so many point solutions that are out there. And when you kind of look back and you reflect on the year and you look back and you say, okay, we added this in and earlier in the year and we added this mid-year and so forth, and now you begin to aggregate that over 2 or 3 or 4 years, suddenly you've got a whole series of different applications that are not necessarily integrated. Adoption within the company may be suffering. Perhaps there's some older design elements in there that are not focused on adoption and the end user and so forth. And so from my perspective, it's always a good time of year, whether it's at the end of the year as you're budgeting or going in, to really take a look at and see what's going to be the best tech stack for your team that's going to be not only the mission critical elements, not all the kind of bells and whistles that sound nice and have kind of a great sales messaging, but what are going to be the mission critical elements, and really focusing on the end users. You know, Mike started at the beginning talking about the specialists and so forth, and ultimately all of us here on this call are focused on driving that top line, and we've all been given goals and targets that are, pick a number, it's 100% growth for the year or 10% or 15%, whatever it is, we probably all feel stretched. But lots of times we pick solutions that benefit sales management or sales ops and not really the end user. And ultimately I think it's really important to think about how they're going to adopt it, how it's going to be used in their day-to-day, and certainly it needs to make sure that it benefits from a management perspective, but ultimately it's got to not inhibit what they're doing day-to-day, but it's really got to facilitate and drive what their activities are. And ultimately then, to Mike's point, I think what you'll see, you know, with the common sense New Year's resolutions with some discipline and stuff, you know, it's really going to allow you to crush those numbers as you move into 2016 and to really drive a significant uplift in revenue if you stick to these. Mike, I'm going to pass it back to you for any closing comments, or if we wanted to open it up to questions.
Excellent. Thanks, David. So just a little bit of webinar logistics. Tomorrow we'll email you a link with today's recorded webinar. Please feel free to share it with any of your colleagues or coworkers. If you look on the bottom, there's also a resources tab where you can download some of the resources that we've made available during today's webinar, including an ebook on how to build a world-class SDR team if you're just breaking into specialization for the first time. You can also download a copy of today's slides and links to upcoming webinars in this webinar series, or how to request a demo from InsideSales.com for some of the technology that can facilitate what we were talking about today. We did want to open it up to Q&A. We had a couple of questions that came in during the conversation already. And then we also wanted to encourage you guys, if you haven't asked any questions, this would be a great time to put them into the Q&A in the software. David, the first question's over to you. It's, can you expand a little bit more on how you might implement a closing calendar?
Certainly. So one, obviously, it's going to be dependent on what your stages and your steps in your sales process are. So most people, it's, you know, whether it's the Challenger sales methodology or it's Sandler or one of these that you've implemented and put into your CRM. So first of all, it's looking at all the different sales stages. Then second of all, it's looking at how you're doing the weighting on that. From our perspective, we look at the closing calendar once it's at that 75% or better. So we consider that kind of a best case to close in that quarter or that month or so forth. And then what we've done is we've really stepped through. We've got a handful of steps, so it might be different for every company, but it's around typically InfoSec, so getting the security measures checked off, getting procurement checked off, getting legal checked off, getting finance checked off, and then ensuring that the appropriate leadership, whether they're the end signer or somebody that has to influence the end signer. And what we do is we literally put dates to that. And we've put this into a, essentially an Excel process, but we're moving that over to our CRM to tie it into that as well, so that then we can begin from a management perspective to see where things are. And we're just doing this for deals 75% or greater, and we have a certain threshold. We do some transactional business, but most of ours is mid-market and enterprise, and so it's deals of a certain size and greater that we require this closing calendar.
Great. Thanks, David. Another question, and this is probably for both of us. What would the best free online collaboration tool be? This is from a guy named Jeff. And Jeff's asking, what would be the best free online collaboration tool? We are the fax and PDF company you referred to. Now, in all fairness, Jeff's company is not, at least not what I was referring to, because I don't think we've bought from Jeff's company at this point. But generally speaking, I don't know that we necessarily want to recommend any specific offering, although maybe, David, you have something in mind. But I think instead maybe we can help frame up how you might evaluate some of the online collaboration technologies that are available.
Yeah, so I think, Jeff, from this perspective, it's really understanding what problem are you trying to solve, and do you have kind of a one-size-fits-all type of contract, one-size-fits-all proposal, and then is it something that is typically you just send out one time, they sign it, or do you have something that's typically there's a back and forth with redlining, with commenting, and these types of things on your MSA or on your contract? I think there's, depending on what it is, there's different options that I would look at. If it's just the very basic and simple, and I'm not going to go, to Mike's point, not go recommend somebody else out there and from a free perspective, but I think you need to look at that process first and then really determine, do you need something that's more comprehensive that's going to allow you to do the online redlining and online commenting and these types of things. There are several solutions out there kind of in both categories. If you just go in and you search for automated proposal management or automated document management, you'll be able to find a variety of different solutions out there.
Thanks, David. The last question's for both of us, and I'm going to propose that we both answer it. It was basically with 10 resolutions, recommended resolutions, and a bonus round, where do we start? Where across this entire spectrum, where should we start? I'm going to propose how I would answer that question, and then, David, I'm going to turn it over to you to see how you would propose to answer that question. I'll tell you the two places I would recommend companies start, and frankly, it's at the very top and at the very bottom of the funnel. And apologies, because it's going to sound a little bit parochial as the marketing guy on the call, but I would certainly take a look at how you're doing versus immediate response as a New Year's resolution. How quickly and how persistently are you following up with the inbound leads that you're getting from marketing? I know a lot of sales organizations say those leads are junk, but the reality is there's good opportunities in those leads, but you have to follow up on them right away, or they age out. And the second one I would recommend focusing on is the advice and the New Year's resolution that David recommended around a closing calendar. Having a strategic set of compelling events that are calendared and planned to get to close. David, what would you add? Well, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I would say speed wins deals ultimately, and so I would agree with you that up front, that statistic that you mentioned in terms of response times, the first person to respond typically is going to be the winner of the deal, whether it's from the SDR side or whether it's getting your proposals out or your contracts out. That speed element is very important. Obviously, you want the quality and you want all those elements as part of it, so you've got to make sure it's the right process or the right technology that you're deploying to improve that speed up front or in the closing section of what you're doing. But to me, that would be kind of the most important parts if you were just going to pick a couple of things.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. I did want to make just a quick shout out. Tinderbox's correct email address, it was incorrect in a previous slide. It's gettinderbox.com. Again, really great technology stack and set of recommendations and services to help optimize opportunity to close. So also I wanted to mention a couple of upcoming webinars. Where does social selling fit in your sales process? Featuring Jamie Shanks, the world-renowned expert on social selling and the CEO of Sales for Life, and Gabe Larson from our Sales Acceleration Services team here at Inside Sales. And that's coming up on January 28th next week. And then the following week, on February 3rd, how high-performance sales teams squeeze the most out of every lead, featuring some partners from Lead Genius, Sales Hacker, and I'll be back on the air that day. Thanks, everyone, for spending some time with us today. Again, please be sure to download the assets, and we'll send you a link tomorrow with access to the recording. Thank you all. Have a great day, and good luck with your sales team's New Year's resolutions. And David, thank you for participating and being a featured speaker today.
Thank you as well. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.